Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm James Bellershow, and I'm here together with my co-host, Randy Searles. And today we want to talk to you about your secret vices. What are the things that we do, that you do, that potentially are bad for us? And how are we consciously thinking about those or not thinking about them? And what does that mean for whether we are being passionately wrong in an important aspect of our lives? So I think to start this off, Randy, we should talk about what we mean when we say, what are your vices? How do we think about vices? Because there's the dictionary definition, and then there's maybe the common usage that I'm thinking of that's a little bit softer than the dictionary definition. If you look up what vices mean, they'll talk about criminal acts, immoral acts, bad things that you might do, killing someone. I don't know if they should call that a vice or not. That seems pretty obviously wrong. So I don't think we would necessarily draw the line at criminality. What we mean when we refer to vices are things that people do that they feel are not unequivocally or only good, and that they know in their heart of hearts they probably shouldn't do or wish they wouldn't do. So things like I smoke cigars, or I drink too much, or I don't get any exercise, or I watch too much TV, or I shop online. I think as we go through the discussion today, we'll explore the types of things that might be considered vices that people think of as vices, but that's the category that I'm talking about. Not really bad and immoral stuff, but things that one wishes they wouldn't necessarily do. Does that make sense to you as a proposed definition?
Yeah, I think so. Healthy, unhealthy habits, things that you wish you didn't do, I guess, is probably a good definition over the criminal things that hopefully our listeners aren't doing. I think when we talk about why people are passionately wrong about vices, has something to do with examining why they do something they know is unhealthy for them, or whether it's psychologically or physically. If they do it, they're like, I can smoke one cigarette, or I can have one or two beers at night and I'm good. I think the passionately wrong thing is to examine why you're doing that, and examine what long-term effects that has, because most people can do whatever they want in their 20s, even into their 30s. But then when you get to be our age, especially, you're like, man, I wish I hadn't drunk 2,000 beers I drank over the last 20 years or whatever. Now I'm in this kind of cycle of doing that every night, and it's hard to break it, or something like that, right?
Yes. I think we can probably put vices for this discussion into two categories: things that you do and things that you don't do. So things that one does that one might consider a vice would be like the example you gave. I wish I hadn't drank 2,000 beers. So a lot of people get into a drinking habit, and then they drink a little bit more and a little bit more because it's fun. It's social. It's relaxing. Another one would be smoking, eating junk food. Those would be vices of the affirmative nature, something that you affirmatively do. A negative vice would be something that you wanted to do or think you should do, but you don't do. So I'm not going to save any money out of my salary. That is actually a vice. You could say, oh, no, actually my vice is spending, but I'd like to consider it from both sides of you're not actually saving money. And so maybe never confronting the fact
Not
that you're
working.
not.
Maybe not working out is probably negative, or a what is it? Positive vice? Is that what you called it?
Not working out is a better example of a negative advice because it doesn't have the same flip side.
Yeah.
You just get some free time of, so I like that one. So anyway, if it helps, we can think of both positive and negative vices. And you talked about how to tie this back to the concept of passionately wrong, which is of course appropriate given the nature of our podcast. And you suggested that it's not thinking about the impact of your vice and how it might play out over the long term. I think that's correct. And the point is that it is an unthinking mistake.
I should record this. Oh, it is recording. My bad. Just delete that.
Oh, that's funny. No, I'm not going to delete it because you gave me a moment of horror. And in fact, one of the ways that you and I helped avoid the vice of not thinking about what we're doing is we make checklists about stuff, even the stuff that we do frequently, right? So the beginning of a podcast always starts with record. Let's maybe address a threshold question. Is this important? Is it something that people who are looking to be passionately wrong less often should care about and should worry about? I get annoyed, or maybe I annoy people is the better way to say it, when I talk about optimizing too much. And I annoy myself actually when I worry about optimizing too much. If you're comparison shopping, you can drive yourself crazy trying to find the best app, the best price for a flight. Is optimizing every aspect of your life in the sense of thinking about and eliminating vices worth it? Or should we give ourselves a little bit of, be kind to ourselves and give ourselves some flexibility to indulge in some of these things? How do we distinguish between, in other words, maybe what I'm getting at, a harmful vice and one that is not so harmful?
I think there's a couple different divisions of vices. I think there's the health factor that we're talking about. We're talking about smoking, drinking, things like that, doing drugs that used to be illegal and now are legal or things like that. And you being able to, you're not harming anyone else, thinking that you're not harming anyone else. But if you're potentially going to make yourself sick sooner and not be there for your family, or cause your family to be concerned about you, invest time and money in you to keep you healthier or get you healthy because of what you did as a vice. I think those are things that definitely to consider in the long run. And going back to the long run.
Okay, some interesting points there, Randy. The idea that you might draw a distinction between vices that affect you primarily or ones that affect others, that's a good distinction to make. Let's say you're in a relationship and you've got a joint account with your spouse and you have a gambling problem and that's your vice. You say, oh, I'm just going to bet a little bit on this weekend's football game. And you end up draining the joint savings account. That is a problem that affects you and others around you quite clearly. But you point out that even when you think you're affecting only yourself, you might be affecting others by virtue of how your decisions play out, and it's going to affect their quality of life at a later point. Let's say you were irresponsible in not choosing to develop a savings habit and you spent all your money, and that's all you did. You just spent your money and never saved anything for yourself. It turns out Social Security isn't there for you. You don't have enough money when you retire and you become a burden to your children who now have to participate in your upkeep in their middle adulthood. That's a vice, I would have said, that extends beyond just you, even though it looked like it was only affecting you. So that's an interesting dynamic to play out. And what I would say is it's clearly a moral question if you're doing things that benefit you and cause a direct harm to others. And that can happen in more ways than you realize. So that's not a position you want to be in, right? That turns your vice into something that is quite a selfish thing when it benefits you and harms others. But even when it only hurts you, why should that be okay? Why should you say, oh, I'm only ruining my own life? What's the big deal? Okay, let's think about that for a minute. How does you, and maybe I'll come to the one that you mentioned, maybe using drugs that once were illegal, but now are partially legal or legal in the state that you're in. I find that whole development there. I read a statistic recently about employers trying to deal with more and more employees who are under the influence of some drug or another. And let's just say marijuana for the sake of discussion. 1 in 6 Americans appears to be a regular consumer of marijuana. And that seems to me like something for which the long-term and medium-term consequences are going to deliver really unpleasant messages to a lot of people who are in that. I could be wrong, but to me, that is a vice that I would say is likely to be destructive of long-term happiness. Even though the people who do it say, hey, hold on a minute, you've got it exactly wrong. This is contributing to my day-to-day happiness, helps me relieve stress, takes the edge off, whatever they say. So how do you deal with the fact that some people wouldn't consider a vice something that they're doing? That's part of where people are passionately wrong. They fool themselves and say, oh no, this is just me having 6 drinks after work. It's no problem. I've never had a car accident, never run anybody over. I still have plenty of money. Is that itself the passionately wrong issue that people don't recognize as vices, things that someone outside would say, oh, hey, Randy, that's totally a vice. You just haven't had an accident yet because you're lucky. And in 10 years, you are going to regret A, having wasted so much money, B, all those extra calories, C, I don't know, whatever.
I
Was
think
this
that's,
a potato issue?
I don't think so. I think it is a reflection of observations over time and the way, when we were young, it wasn't even mandatory to put on a seatbelt. And so you could have that. Now it's mandatory, but it's like, I'm not going to put it on. Now it's illegal in most places, but it's the right thing to do and you're more comfortable without it. And I know when I was growing up, I didn't really think about it, putting it on for the first couple of years I was driving. I don't know if it was mandatory or not. I can't remember, but I know when I was a kid, it wasn't mandatory. So I think those are just ways of looking at, maybe we're not looking at the marijuana thing through the eyes of the young, where they're like, hey, we've done all these studies and blah, blah, blah. and it's not as bad as we always thought it was. But I think you can't deny some of the studies about smoking and drinking. And I don't know if you've noticed in Europe, but I'm always amazed by how many people are smoking in Europe. It seems like the United States is diminished. I still feel like we lost the war because tobacco, finally someone proved that tobacco was bad for you, really, like definitely bad for you. And then now everyone's smoking whatever they're smoking now. I don't know, there's these weird things. They got 5 different contraptions they can smoke at them, and it's supposed to be better for you. But I'm of the opinion that anything that goes into your lungs probably isn't the greatest thing for you. And that maybe that's my age showing, but that it's also, to me, some of these vices, you do them and it's just me. But I don't see smoking that way. I don't know if any vice, if we call it a vice, only affects you. Smoking affects your health, which is going to hurt hopefully not, but might, high percentage chance going to hurt your family when and if you get sick from it. B, when you smoke, it's getting everywhere. So people are breathing in secondhand smoke. They're getting it on their clothes and all their junk and stuff like that. This is a pet peeve of mine, obviously, but I've never had a problem with smoking. I've never tried it, never got addicted to it or anything. Drinking is the same thing, right? You drink and you're less around for your family and friends in a cognizant way. And you're like, oh yeah, I know I have family members that drink just like they always drank and never had a problem. But as they're getting older, maybe they shouldn't be driving because it's a lot more restrictive. The DUI thing's is a lot less. And I don't know what that's going to do to a 60 or 70-year-old person if they get their license taken away for a DUI. Hopefully they don't kill anyone. But my dad, when I was younger, I had just had my driver's license for a couple of years and I was driving. He's like, speeding, son. And I was like, but everyone's speeding. I was like, yeah, if you actually killed someone, wouldn't you feel bad? Wouldn't you feel like it was your fault because you didn't follow the rules that they've set out here, that the safe speed? And I had to think about it. Like, yeah, that's a pretty good point. So I don't know. I think the vices, I think people just need to look at what everyone considers are vices. Hey, is this a vice or not? Is it good for you? Okay, it's not. You do it once in a while. But I think you should look at, why are you doing it? Are you stressed that you feel like you have to do this to relax and it's the only way you've found to relax? And maybe there's other ways, outputs you could bring into your life or inputs that would relieve that stress, where you don't have to harm your body, make other people uncomfortable, spend more time with your family. I think that's what the biggest thing vices do. All the vices that I can think of most of them are substance: alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, gambling, watching TV. I got to tell you, all the vices I just mentioned, I don't consider myself having those, but I do watch more TV than I need to. And all of those take time away from family in some way or form, because you're having to leave the house and go smokes by yourself, probably, and then come back in. That's probably less time than me watching an hour or two of TV and blah, blah, land. Or if you're drunk, then you're not really interacting with your family. Maybe you're not setting a great example for people, that are in your family either. Maybe they're concerned about you. Maybe they're having to watch out for you. So therefore they're not be able to enjoy the time. So I think the thing is to reflect on how your vices are affecting, especially the people you love around you. And if that's something you feel you need to do, or is there whatever reason that is driving you to that vice, maybe you could switch it around and figure something else that would fill that hole.
All right. So you're getting into some good topics there, Randy, that I'd like to explore. But first, I want to make you feel a little bit better about smoking, or give you another perspective on it, because you're obviously bothered by it. And a lot of people are bothered by it. I read an interesting study a while back about the average savings habits of smokers versus non-smokers. And people had discovered that smokers save on average something like 10% less over their lifetimes. And they were trying to figure out why. And somebody suggested, hey, it could just be that they're rational and they save less because they need less. And turns out that smokers on average die 10 years or 8 years younger than healthy people. So they legitimately need less money. And so sometimes I joke when I was working with my HR guy about how we should manage our pension and our retirees. And I'd say we should encourage our retirees to take up dangerous habits, bungee jumping, skydiving. And I think there is a psychological theory that people have an urge to commit self-harm and to commit suicide, and it runs deep. And I think it is, some vices are so clearly self-destructive and people do them nonetheless, knowing and being able to see objectively that they create serious harm to them over time, that you might say, well, is that person legitimately trying to hurt themselves in a way that maybe unconsciously they feel bad about something? So we'll get back to the point that you ended on, which is to consider. One of the suggestions we're going to give people is to consider why they're pursuing a vice. And it might be for some distraction, pursuit of pleasure, but it also could be because they are deeply bothered by something and they're causing themselves harm indirectly on purpose. But before we get to that, as we talk, there's so many different vices that come up. You mentioned gambling, watching TV. I'm curious about the watching TV point because many people do it. Americans on average spend a ridiculous amount of time. It's more than 8 hours a day consuming media of some kind. So whether you listen to a podcast or watching TV or just the radio's on in the background, I think they count all of those things as consuming media, but it is almost a constant presence. Would you say there's a substantive difference between what I would have said is a healthy vice, reading? So I have a book in my hands and I'm reading a book for 3 hours. Is that any better qualitatively than you sitting in front of the TV watching Netflix for 3 hours? Because really, isn't it exactly the same impact it has on those around you? Is reading a book better for me because it's somehow stimulating my brain in a way that watching Netflix isn't? And I know that doesn't necessarily have an answer, but I'm curious, right? We give ourselves a free pass for some kind of stuff because we say it's good for us. What if I was doing an online course for 3 hours, Randy? Would you say, oh, that's different? That's okay because there's some benefit associated with it. And I think that's the distinction now that I'm talking that comes out of it. If I read, theoretically, I get some mental benefit. If I take an online course, I get some mental benefit, but probably less so with TV. That's why you'd put that in the vice category. But otherwise, the impact on those around you and on you yourself is the same. I'm sedentary. I'm not doing anything with anybody else for 3 hours.
If I was to compare those two, I don't think I ever found myself like reading books in the middle of the day. I would read them in the evening after dinner. And maybe that's when, if you're looking at when you're watching TV, if that's when you're watching TV as a family, maybe it's not a vice. However, that's not how I watch TV. It's also worse than it was when we were growing up, where you had to watch the shows at the time they came out, or eventually they had the VCR where you could tape them, which was, no one knew how to work that thing anyway. And then they had TiVo where you could tape all the shows and you'd have 5 million shows that you never watched taped on TiVo on your screen, on your TV for a while or something. But now with Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these other streaming things, you can just watch 12 hours of shows right in a row and you can get lost like I did when I had COVID, which maybe that's probably the best way to work with COVID. I also think that when you define a vice, you're defining, this is something I do because I want to. I consider it a negative thing, but I do it anyway for whatever reason, for the way it makes me feel. But I wouldn't want my kids to do it, or I wouldn't want I don't think this is a good example. So I think the definition of advice would be like, I don't think most smokers say, I can't wait till my kids start smoking, then we can smoke together outside. Or maybe somebody will say, I can't wait till my kid turns 21 so we can go out for a beer. But I don't think anyone says, I can't wait till he turns 21 so he can drink himself into a stupor and stumble home and forget what happened. I don't think that's what anyone thinks. And maybe that's over the top for a simple vice that's reaching into alcoholism or something. But I don't think anyone, when I talk about vices, I don't want my kids to sit in front of the TV for 8 hours. I'd rather they do their homework and get out and see in the woods and stuff. And so that's when I think about advice, I think about, would I want people to learn something from me doing this and then copy me? And I don't think I do. And am I embarrassed that I do it? I'm not embarrassed that I do it, but I don't want my kids to do it, I guess, is the way I would define the vice.
I like that definition, and it's one that I think we can work with. And I like the two components of it. This is something that I do myself, and I recognize that I do it. I allow myself to do it for various reasons. But if you were to ask me, is this something I recommend others do or my kids do? The answer would be no, actually not. I think it's not conducive to all sorts of things. That's a nice definition. So would I recommend someone else do this? And I also like it, Randy, because it implies you are aware, right? It's not an unthinking activity. If you were to be asked about it, you'd say, yeah, I probably do watch too much TV, but I let myself do it. My question would be to you and to everyone who's having those thoughts, why are you doing it? If you wouldn't recommend somebody else to do it, why do you do it? Is it a stress relief issue? Is it because you think you've earned it? Is it I think people are creatures of habits. And what happens is if you accumulate too many habits, I allow myself to be a couch potato. I allow myself to watch TV. I allow myself to eat sweets. I allow myself, you pick 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and all of a sudden it's starting to potentially have a big impact on your life. So if you would tell someone else not to do it, why do you tell yourself it's okay to do it? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to understand generically, why do we allow ourselves to do this? What's the human condition?
No, I think you put your finger on it. It's something I've always done and I never really thought about it. And now I keep doing it because it's comfortable. I'm not, because I'm older, I'm not going to be addicted like a young guy will be addicted, like a young person would be addicted. You have these thoughts. But I think that's why we're talking about this, why people might be passionately wrong about their vices, is they should look at it with a larger spectrum and say, am I setting a good example? Am I spending time with the people I love and that I want to spend time with, or am I shutting them out because I want to watch whatever whatever you're watching, whatever I'm watching? It's something I've had a problem with since for a long time is I get focused on something. I guess this is maybe advice. I keep saying, I feel like someone said, what's your weakness? And it's like, oh, I watch too much television. No, if we're trying to hire you, what's your weakness? Sometimes I'm so focused on a project that I shut everyone else out. You always try to think of these weaknesses that aren't really weaknesses, that are really strengths for what they're trying to do. But that's
Sometimes I work so hard that I just,
I work so hard. Sometimes I work 24 hours a day for 3 days in a row until I get the job done perfectly. And yeah, but one of my, I think I consider my vice, and I think my wife would agree, is I get focused on something and she's talking to me and I have to like physically shut the computer and look at her. Okay, what are we talking about? Before that, I'm like, I'm in the middle of something, I'll get to you, but nothing I'm doing is as important as what probably she has to tell me, to tell you the truth. Cause nothing I'm doing can't wait. I'm not there's nothing life or death happening on my computer screen. And I had to realize that because we had a couple talks about it. And so that's what I do when there's a conversation going on, even if it's a spontaneous conversation. Hey, I'm putting this away. I'm focused. What's going on? And so I can address the problem or sympathize with the problem or whatever my role is in the situation.
so I think what we are talking about is acknowledging and thinking about what it is that we're doing. That's the key to deciding if you want to address a vice or not, is to just take a step back, get some perspective and say, how is this behavior affecting not just me, but other people? Like, the person who you're with all the time, if you have a partner, your family, your friends, because you shouldn't fool yourself. Your behavior actually probably does have an impact on not just you, but those around you. Of course it does. And I would say, do we have any advice for people about how to quit or change the course of a vice? First of all, cold turkey versus gradual. What you just described is being mindful about a circumstance and just in the course of a potential conversation with your spouse, putting the tablet or the TV aside for a moment and saying, okay, now I'm listening to you. That's a simple, easy thing to do. It doesn't mean you're not going to watch TV anymore. It just means when you're talking to your spouse, you're going to actually talk to your spouse and pay attention. So that's what I would consider a gradual approach or an easy approach of just in the moment making a decision. But if it was, say, eating Doritos or smoking, maybe take a more serious example. Do you have any personal thoughts about how to change your habits?
I think it would be going back to a lot of the solutions we've had in this podcast, which is have an open mind, be open to understanding what people are trying to tell you. If someone says you have a problem, maybe you need to step back and look at it. I had this when I was young. I was never much of a drinker in high school when it was legal. And then it was legal in college for a while. I think we talked about this, but I never had a problem. And then when I joined the Army, maybe for the first year or two, I don't know if it was a problem or not, but I didn't really like the taste of beer. So I would drink until I drank too much because I would slam them because I didn't really like them. And so if there's a party or we were somewhere, then it was a really quick thing. So one time I was with a friend of mine. I was visiting a friend of mine in college after I was on leave. And his name is Mark. And I think he got a drinking problem. So I was like, whoa. So I stepped back and I looked at what I was doing and why I was doing it. And I was like, I don't even like to do it. Why am I doing it? So I stopped doing it. And not to say I never took a drink again, but I rarely did. And I pretty much tell people I don't drink. And then the idiots will say, look, you're drinking, you liar. I was like, I have one drink like a year or maybe two in a social setting and it's never beer, but yeah, you got me. But I don't have to prove anything to you. But I would say have an open mind and accept criticism. If it's criticism, ideally, it's just someone who cares about you saying something, and don't look at it as they're trying to change you or they're trying to harass you or make you feel bad. Look at it as just assess what you're doing. And obviously, if they brought it to your attention, they think it's affecting your relationships around you. And maybe you need to look at it that way.
It's a data point, and a smart person takes data from whatever source, even if it's painful. Perhaps sometimes I would say, especially if it's painful, the impact that our habits and our vices have on our friends and the people around us can also be, besides a source of information, a source of support. One of the things I wish for my children is that they surround themselves with friends who are good for them. And by good for them, I just mean the ones who will help them become better people. Sometimes you will find yourself in a group of people who themselves are vigorous proponents of a vice, heavy drinkers, smokers, whatever. And you are more inclined to do it because of them doing it. And the same thing happens in the other direction, though. If you are around super fit people, you're more likely to be paying attention to the things that they're focused on. So in a way, I would have said your suggestion to listen to what your friends and family are saying, not just for the data point, but also to surround yourself with people who want to help you be the kind of person that you would wish to be. Not people who are trying to change you for their own sake, but just, hey, Randy, I know you want to be healthy and happy. And did you realize that what you're doing here is not contributing to either of those things? That's a hard message for someone to say. It takes a lot of courage for someone to step up and give you that kind of feedback. And you should treat it like the gift that it is. So I like the duality of recognizing that not only do your vices affect people around you, but the people around you can affect which vices you might choose to emphasize or de-emphasize. So use them. Use your friends as a strategic tool. And by that, it sounds so calculating, but I don't mean it to be bad. If you have a choice between hanging around with a person who is themselves a lazy couch potato who never does anything, or someone who is out committing themselves to go into the gym 3 times a week, yeah, maybe you spend a little bit more time with the one who's going in a direction that you also wish to go. Yeah, I don't think we solved the world's problems, but at least we thought a little bit about what our vices, what people do, and why they do them. And then I think if we had a takeaway, it would probably be to take a step back and look a little bit at the bigger picture about how your vices are affecting not just you, but others. And then lastly, to use the feedback from others to help you maybe not only see, but then also behave in a way that is more of your choosing. So with that, hopefully you guys still have joy in your life, and we haven't suggested you take away all the things that make you have fun, but I don't think that's the risk with our passionately wrong listeners. Thanks everybody for listening. Talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Like the podcast, follow us, subscribe. We appreciate it.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.